share your application.
Absolutely.
Hello, welcome to Step into the Sunlight, Cloud Computing and DevOps Work After COVID-19. This is part of our Step into the Sunlight series of webinars from Simplilearn, and our guest today is Matthew David, digital leader from Accenture. A little bit more about him in a moment. First, I'd like to discuss how you can participate in the webinar. The speech bubble will bring up the chat window, and when you see the chat window, go ahead, Matthew, try to select all panelists. My colleagues will be able to respond to you. Remember to hit the send button. For questions that you would like to have answered by Matthew in the Q&A portion of the webinar toward the end, please use the Q&A function. That's the question mark, or you can use the three-dot symbol to pull up the Q&A. Again, type in your question and hit send. We log those questions to be answered at the end of the webinar. We also are going to be asking you for some feedback during the webinar. First poll question that I would like to ask is a two-parter. One of them is, what's your current role? And within Cloud Computing, DevOps, or other roles that you may have. And how are you feeling today? It's a relevant question in this uncertain time we live in, to check in with people and see if they're feeling okay, better than okay, maybe not so well. I'll give you another minute to complete the poll.
I think these are two fantastic questions to ask, considering where we are with COVID-19, but then the optimism, I think, that's around the DevOps field of study. I think these are good questions.
Yeah, thank you. And it's important for us to know who's in the audience, what are your interests, and to be concerned about how you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like Matthew said, the time of a pandemic. We've all been working from home for a while. Some of us are on tighter lockdown than others, but it can be a stressful time. So
Yes, indeed.
Close the poll. It will close in 15 seconds. So you have your chance to finish answering your question and hit submit. I'll share with you what we found. It's a kind of an interesting poll result.
Do you want me to go out of full screen mode so you can show the results?
We're good. But here's the poll result. Shows that not that many of you today are already in the Cloud DevOps area, or at least not in the positions we've listed. But this is a good opportunity to learn more about it and more about the opportunities. So with that, stop sharing the poll and we'll go on, and I'll introduce Matt. Matthew David is a digital leader from Accenture, which is one of the leading consulting companies in the world. And he has published 13 books. He's also a leader in the technologies of cloud, DevOps, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. And we're very glad to have him. So,
well, it's fantastic to be here, Stuart.
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew. I'll ask you the first question.
Okay.
How is cloud computing and DevOps, how are these fields going to evolve as we come out of this pandemic?
So I think it's a very good question, and one of the areas of focus that I've always applied to my career over the last 25 years has always been, what is the next 5 year horizon for technology? And um, I do this every year. I do it more formally in the last couple of years with Simplilearn. We actually put out an ebook, which is a forecast for what we see is going to happen in the following year. And one of the things I always consider is, is there an X factor that will change things? So for instance, in 2007, you could argue that the X factor was Steve Jobs releasing the iPhone and completely changing the market as we saw it. Nobody could have seen what was happening with COVID-19. It is an unprecedented event that has affected every single person globally. There is no restriction on who can get the COVID-19, and so there has been some very dramatic changes in our lifestyle because of that.
Yeah,
What's interesting?
I was just going to say that this is what Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls a black swan event.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good way to define it. And what's interesting though, when it comes specifically to cloud and DevOps, is that a lot of companies have been either considering the migration to cloud and DevOps, have started doing some work, or have moved to cloud and DevOps. I would argue that there's a lot of companies that are still in that middle stage where they're considering and have done some migration with the COVID-19 shutdown that we've experienced. In many ways, it has accelerated our digital mindset by 5 years. And for instance, I was talking to my neighbor a couple months ago, and he was amazed and surprised around technologies like Zoom. He'd never used them, hadn't had any cause to use them in his business. And I mean, I've been using them for almost 20 years. And what it made me realize is that the mindset for many people just hasn't been on digital innovation, leveraging AI, cloud, DevOps, other technologies. It's been on, how do I get my job done today? Very tactical. And so we've been forced to go forward 5 years and actually consider and bring in what is the future. So earlier on we were talking about how I see the two questions we asked at the beginning of the session of how you're feeling. I will tell you, every single day I wake up and there is I go through a split personality. One side of me continues to be stressed and anxious by the events that are happening as part of COVID-19. The other half of me, however, is extraordinarily optimistic about the future of our careers within cloud and DevOps. I mean, it just really is a shining area within technology right now. So hopefully that helps address that question.
And it's I think a lot of people have that same kind of two-sided attitude that we live in an uncertain time. Human beings don't deal well with uncertainty.
No, they really don't.
We all prefer to know that the sun will come up tomorrow and we'll still have our jobs and our families and our health.
Hmm.
On the other hand, as you say, the situation has created new opportunities. And if
Hmm.
we're
It really has.
well positioned to take advantage of those, this is going to be a good time to make career advancements and some great life changes.
It really is. And I mean, earlier on, when you were introducing me, you see the term blockchain. I would have, I'm always interested in emerging and bleeding edge technologies. I just gravitate towards that. And blockchain obviously is one of those. If you think of the Gartner hype curve, it's one of those early technologies. But I think we will see that if you invest your education into what were previously considered emerging technologies, the acceleration to adoption for those technologies is going to happen much faster because we are in a world where, in the US, we've all been living from home for 4 months now. And I think that as we continue and look into the future, I'm not sure how much of that is going to change over the next 4 months.
You and I had a brief chat and talking about technology adoption, and it's interesting
Mm-hmm.
that um, cloud and DevOps are not really new technologies in that
No, no,
they're
not
a
at all.
decade or more old. Um, I was it was interesting to think about, it would be interesting to compare how long it's taken for people to adopt these technologies
Mm-hmm.
versus how long it took people in the early 20th century to adopt um, the automobile from the time of the
Yeah,
horseless carriage of Benz in Germany to the time that people were drag racing down Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena and singing songs about it. So,
yeah.
but
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that that there are. I think there are three key barriers for adoption of any new thing, whether it's a technology, a lifestyle, whatever it is. I think the first one is a financial barrier. That's always a given. The second is the ease of use of the solution. And you can certainly look at the earlier cars. I mean, they were expensive and they were difficult to use. But that happens with all new technologies when they come out. But then the third one is the most critical. It's the cultural buy-in. Are we ready to adopt that technology? And you can certainly see examples where people have come up with what I would consider are really clever and interesting technologies, but the cultural adoption isn't there yet to accept them. So a good example is Google with Google Glass. We've had Google Glass now for 6 years, 6, 7 years, and it's never gotten out of being a niche market. We also know that Apple is working on a similar technology. They've been incorporating their augmented reality technology for multiple years into their phones. Um, but where the difference between the two of them is Apple, rightly or wrongly, is very good at understanding that cultural pivot point when we as humans are ready to go to that next level of technology.
yeah, Google Glass is a really good example of that because of it was Google tried to roll it out as a consumer technology a few
Yeah,
years back, and not only was there not cultural acceptance, there was outright cultural rejection,
yeah,
where there were reported instances of people being assaulted for wearing Google glasses because of the perceived invasion of privacy of the people
yeah.
around them. So, yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
the technology has to match the what they call the zeitgeist of the economy and the marketplace before it
Yep,
can be accepted. Let's move on.
absolutely, absolutely.
Let's move on. So, tell me about these particular changes in DevOps that you see.
Sure. So there's a number of things that are happening with DevOps, and the one thing that I always caution with any blanket statements you make with DevOps is that they're true for right now. They will not be true tomorrow. And what I mean by that is that the advances in technologies and connected technologies with DevOps is happening at a breakneck speed, and I think that this year that's only been accelerated more. We see this actually clearly with what Microsoft is doing. We see the same thing happening with what Amazon is doing with AWS. Then we also see it with the number of startups coming out with technologies. So to go through what we have here, just a few key areas. What I think that you'll start seeing more of is just these highly connected, well, so highly connected, and I want to say loosely connected at the same time, agile infrastructures. And so what do I mean by that? Highly connected from a digital point of view, but loosely connected in that we'll move away from big mammoth solutions and have lots of loosely connected individual solutions. So the kind of the microservices point of view, the API point of view. But there's value in that, and the value is that it's a lot easier to manage a small thing than it is a huge big thing. And so, for instance, Microsoft is working on a new technology that they've open sourced that will allow people to be able to share elements within a document. And I expect to see the same kind of sharing and agility happening with DevOps. The second area that I see is that there is a drive with businesses, even traditional businesses that have been in business for 100 or more years, to be technology driven. Indeed, if you are not a technology company, then there's a very good opportunity that your company will go out of business, unless this is a very specific niche market. But I would argue that every company is a technology company. And they just don't know it yet. And so we want to be looking at ways in which our teams can very nimbly take advantage of the technology, but then also the data, and then really expose and unlock the value that can be used by the business to take the business to the next level. A good example of this, actually, there's a company in Milwaukee called Milwaukee Tools, and they have a technology called OneLog that they have built into their tools. So at any time on a construction site that the owner of the construction site will know where all their tools are. The value that you have from that is that it's quicker to get to the tools. It's easier to ensure the value of the tools because the tools themselves aren't going to walk away off site. And then probably more importantly is when you're using the tools, particularly like a hand drill or a pneumatic drill, a pneumatic tool of some type, there is a wear and tear life built into that. And so if you can analyze that data, you can actually predict when the tool is going to break down. And it's a lot easier to be able to fix a tool before it breaks than it is to replace a tool after it's broken. So I can see many more technologies that are going to lift up the value of existing infrastructures with technology that helps reinforce the value of that solution. And then,
if I may,
yeah.
interesting how pervasive this effect is, because there was a American politician who was derided a little bit recently for saying, anybody can be a farmer. You dig a hole, you put the seed in the ground, the corn grows. Anybody can do that. And
yeah,
the part of the backlash were farmers sending pictures of, this is the inside of my combine harvester, and
yep,
it's
I
a
know it very well.
wall of screens, so GPS locations,
Yep,
things that are talking about the quality of the soil, the quality of the plants being grown. Much more technology than most of us use in our day-to-day work. And
yep.
so it was, there's really, like you said, not many fields where technology isn't um, making inroads.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. IBM have stated this many times in the past that the work that IBM will be doing 5 years from now, 40% of it doesn't exist today. And I would argue that we can start extending that reach beyond technology to all businesses. And certainly over the next decade, we're going to see a huge change. And frankly, COVID-19 has accelerated that change. There has to be investments that are made digitally to allow our thought leaders to be able to work effectively together. So just a couple other points here. One of the changes, this is a continued change, which is there are an increasing number of small developers contributing solutions that help us within DevOps. And an example of this is that if you are a front end developer, then you probably used React or Angular. The number three solution is Vue.js for front end development. Vue was developed by one person. It's now open source and being managed and developed and extended by a large group of people. But originally, it was one person, and that one person helped change an industry. And that's the mindset you have to have as an individual developer and contributor to open source programs, is that you don't have to be a big corporation anymore. You really don't. You can be a small company and you can change the landscape. So I certainly encourage developers to help contribute to that change, because it's always good. It may seem rough at times, but I always like change. And then the final point there is around brands trying to navigate this rapid acceleration of digital maturity. Again, we've been all forced to go through this. I think that brands in particular this year have just seen just a tremendous challenge, and with shopping malls being closed, restaurants being closed, the way that we buy our products changing. It has completely transformed overnight. And I think that in many ways, that even if we went back to quote unquote normal tomorrow, the new normal that we'll go into post COVID will be very different to where we were 4 months ago.
Yeah, it's and here in California, for example, where we had just seen some businesses being allowed to reopen, the very next day the governor announced that they needed to close back down. Things like
Yeah.
hairdressers, nail salons, fitness centers, things like that, where um, we don't know from one day to the next what's going to happen, and these businesses have to find, um, where possible, new models for working
Yeah.
that work around this challenge.
Yes. Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
can, Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. No, 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 go ahead.
I was going to ask a related question. When you look at cloud and DevOps, do you think that DevOps would have reached its level of accelerated adoption without the technology of cloud to enable it?
So that's a good question, and I have a cloud bias. I think I'm while cloud isn't I think from a price point of view, I think that on-premise and cloud can often be the same. The opportunities you have with cloud are unprecedented. For instance, new technology comes out, I can spin up an environment in a cloud environment in a matter of hours. I was playing around with a blockchain solution the other day, and I had to spin up 5 different servers. I had the whole operation up and running in 2 hours. And doing that on premise is almost impossible to do. I think what cloud has offered is that tool, that next logical tool for acceleration. And you have to look at cloud as an accelerator. And then there's cloud as a whole, but then you look at the individual players within clouds, and so you have your big players such as Microsoft, Google, and obviously AWS. And then you have niche players as well. So you have to look at how all of them work together. But more importantly, is what are the individual tools and services that they have that allow you to accelerate your work? So, for instance, Google has some fantastic AI tools. I'm very partial to the DevOps tools that Azure has. Just the ways of being able to manage data is phenomenal with AWS. So how do you leverage all of them and then take it to the next level?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect also of looking at the qualitative differences between platforms. Um, we haven't yet reached, or will we ever, a point where they're all plug compatible with each other and you can just
Well,
switch from
they're
one to
getting
the
they're
other
getting
without.
better. They are getting better. And Microsoft started 2 years ago, even 3 years ago. You kind of had to make a choice, and you're kind of committed to a cloud provider. And I'm talking about the big ones here, between the Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, what we also refer to as the MAG cloud providers. And it used to be like you kind of had to throw all your coins into one bucket. But I would argue that certainly within the last year, they've become more flexible. Oops, not sure why my screen went away there. Have become more flexible at being able to work interoperably with each other. And Microsoft actually led that way. They started that about 2 years ago, of being able to lead that. And now it's not as easy as they make it out to sound, but it's getting better. I think that you'll see more and more of that. And I think what will help differentiate the cloud providers moving forward is the services that sit on top of the core foundational products. So your VM environments, your platform environments, your data environments, your AI, those kind of tools. They will become the standard foundation that everybody will have, and then there'll be a layer on top of that for developers and DevOps teams that allow you to move the data as objects between the cloud providers. And then on top of that will be an additional layer, which will be your business power users layer. And you're starting to see that with the no-code and low-code solutions that are coming out. AWS just announced theirs. Microsoft has their Power platform that they've also announced. And I think that's going to be an interesting market to watch over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's kind of sounds like you're describing how telecommunications developed so that you ended up with the different layers um, in that model where
Yeah,
have you can interchange different providers at each layer.
yeah.
So let's go on and already started to answer this question, what the new normal will look like. What else would you like to say about that topic?
So I think the new normal, I think that a couple of things, one of the things that I actually, there have been, I'm sorry, my dog's barking in the background there. One of the things that I have liked about the new normal we're in is the ability to work from home. I'm a consultant, so I spend most of my time on the road, Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday every week, traveling, and I love meeting with my clients. I love traveling around the country, but I also like hanging out with my family. I think they're pretty cool, and so I have personally really enjoyed working from home. I've actually found myself much more productive. I've been able to do some activities that I wouldn't have done before, and so those are one of the areas that I think just foundationally, I think all of us will appreciate more. I think that certainly over the next year or two, I think there's going to be a greater emphasis of being able to have a balance of working from home as well as working in the office, assuming that we find a cure for the COVID-19. So that's one thing. The second thing, however, is as we look at cloud and DevOps, is that the one thing that has allowed our companies globally to operate effectively through this pandemic is technology. And we've seen it with, we refer to meetings as Zoom meetings now. And we use Microsoft Teams, we use Skype, we use, any number of tools to help us stay connected. And it's really, really helped. And I think that what we'll see certainly moving forward as part of that new normal is that understanding and that leveling up of what can be done with technology. And I think that what that will provide the opportunity for DevOps teams is businesses are going to come back and say, well, my customer is now asking, can we do this with them? Can we how can we start selling and using these technologies? And that's where DevOps and cloud really come into play as we start breaking apart the Lego bricks of the technologies that we're working with and reassembling them into solutions that are bespoke solutions for our businesses. So I think that there is, we're in a period of acceptance of technology right now, and because we've been forced to level up. And then now that we're in this new world, I think over the next few months here, say the next 6 months, there's going to be that realization we can do so much more with technology. And so I think that's going to be the next new thing for cloud and DevOps, is to be able to rapidly deliver on those promises.
It's interesting because I'm old enough to remember in the 1980s in the automobile industry
Yep.
when the dream was that you would be able to go to an automobile dealership and say, well, I like this model of car and I want this 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 in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the color, the interior, the different options. They would be able to enter that order and the factory would be able to configure your car
Mm-hmm.
on all of the cars being built that day with all
Mm-hmm.
of the things you wanted on it, and it would roll off the assembly line and be on a truck to you the next day.
Yep.
Um, and I don't know that they've ever quite gotten there in physical manufacturing, but in terms of software manufacturing, of course, you don't you no longer have the retooling that you used to have to change processes because things have become containerized, modularized, and
Mm-hmm.
as you said, now you can actually talk to a customer about, well, how can you make this work for me in particular with my particular requirements and needs?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fundamental shift between from the notion of this is how we took the specification and turned it into software. Now
Yeah.
it's this is how we take components and assemble you the application you need. So
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up that example of the automotive industry in the 1980s, because what really powered it was lean. And what's interesting is you take that same lean mindset and then you fast forward, and 10 years ago, the lean startup book was brought out and took the best of lean and took the best of where we were with agile, and it's looked at accelerating what could be delivered. And then fast forward again to where we are today, and it's just that continued maturity of that ability to be able to deliver solutions that are designed for the moment. So not only are we looking at having a car that's built for us, we're looking at having a whole solution that's designed for us, for me and for you right now. And I think that's where we're moving towards.
yeah, it's fascinating.
Hmm.
Let's go on. Um, please go ahead and address these.
Yeah. So the question was, how's cloud and DevOps work? How has it changed for us? What's interesting is, um, we kind of talked about this, but the work from home concept, really has companies to rapidly adopt cloud. And you look at numbers such as Zoom, they saw in a 3 month period increase of adoption of 160% for all the years they've been around. In 3 months, they nearly tripled the size of their footprint of users. And Microsoft has seen the same, just accelerated adoption for Microsoft Teams, and any really kind of collaboration tool should be absolutely accelerating. My kids have been using Google Classroom as an example. So there just has been this accelerator that COVID-19 has provided, and we should all, as technologists, see that as an optimistic thing, because the more people become invested in technology, the more value the work we do becomes to them. I think that the longer we're in COVID-19, the greater the opportunities are for a global workforce. And certainly, I've worked for a number of companies through my career. Some companies are emerging startup, very modern technology-driven companies where it didn't matter where I lived, as long as we all got our job done. And then there have been other more traditional companies where they really wanted me in an office space, occupying the same office every day. And I think what we've seen now because of COVID-19, none of us have those traditional office spaces, and we realize the expense has come around those. But what it also means is that as you have a skill, the opportunities for you to be able to get work through companies like Upwork and other places has increased dramatically because you don't physically have to relocate, and there isn't the expense around relocation required anymore. So I think that's another huge plus. And certainly, if you have any technical skills, you should be advertising yourself to be able to get some of the work that's coming out now. Supply chains are going to have to be, I think, reconfigured and localized to meet our specialized skill sets. That's just an area that I see is going to change. I know that Amazon is investing heavily into their own supply chain. I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I believe I saw that they were investing something like $10 billion into their supply chain. And whenever you see a company like Walmart or Amazon making those kind of investments, you have to kind of step back and go, okay, what are they doing and why are they doing it? And then the third question becomes, should we be doing it? And I suppose there's a fourth question is if you sell product, will we be impacted by what they're doing? Certainly I've worked for companies in the past that will be impacted. And then the final area, and this is more of a specialization, is with AI ops. And so if you're doing work where you are managing the operations of your infrastructure, the network, whether it's in a data center or whether it is in the cloud, you really want to be looking at those AI ops tools and skilling up on those if that's an area that you find interesting. So your APM skills, your ITOA skills, you want to be skilling those up because I think that there's going to be this significant transition to AI ops over the next 3 to 5 years, simply because companies can scale then and increase their digital footprint without having to dramatically or equally increase the people skills. You can use AI ops to automate a lot of that work. So that's really how I see the work changing over the next few years.
Okay, let's move on then. I'm going to ask the audience another poll question, and this one is to ask you about what are the skills in DevOps and cloud that you currently use. Here are a few of the names, but you could maybe in a different position. We'll give you a couple of moments. We're not going to take the whole 5 minutes. Another minute and a half to answer this question, but we would like to assess where you are in terms of your skill levels today. This is kind of consistent with the first poll question, which asked about what positions people are in. Because what I'm seeing as we're progressing is that most people are saying they're not really using these skills right now. So it's consistent with the answer in the first
Mm-hmm.
poll because it seemed like we have a lot of people who want to learn about DevOps, about cloud computing, and
Mm-hmm.
um, they're not in that field right now, but would like to.
Well, yeah, the good thing, and this is one of the reasons why I love working with Simplilearn so much, is we provide a lot of materials for free. And so we have articles and ebooks that we constantly update on these technologies. But we also have a YouTube channel that's just on DevOps. And so to get a good foundational understanding of the tools that you would need within a DevOps environment. For instance, we're just finishing up a series of about 12 videos on how to get up and started with Node.js and the supporting tools that you would use as a Node developer. Um, Simplilearn makes those available along with the more traditional interactive classes. And so it's a great way to kind of get in and upskill yourself and make yourself available to that next, that next opportunity. The other thing that I would then, but I would also complement while you're upskilling yourself is being aware of the value that DevOps provides to any company. So as you look to solve a problem that's in your company, you want to go in with the mindset of, if I solve this problem, how much money am I going to either save the company or am I going to generate? And you want that to be that to be really your story. A good story always starts with, how would you like to make $5 million today? And I'm going to tell you how to make $5 million by spending $300,000. And that's where these skills really come into play. Is as you are upskilling yourself, always think about the value you'll be unlocking, because that really then makes what you're doing absolutely vital to the success of the business.
So I just want to mention that, as I said, most people aren't using cloud and DevOps skills in their current work, and that highlights the value of this webinar for most of our audience because it will give you more exposure to potential.
Hmm.
So let's move on then.
Sure.
And so, what if you were in this area and
Hmm.
you're a cloud solutions architect or DevOps engineer? Um, what other skills should you be adding to your repertoire,
Hmm.
or what are the areas that somebody wanting to move into the field
Yeah.
should look at as entry points?
So that's a great question. And I think that there's really three ways to answer that question. The first is, do you have a developer's background? For instance, do you use open source solutions? Are you a Java developer? Are you a Microsoft .NET developer? Look at what your background is and then pick a cloud provider. So, for instance, if you are a Java developer, you may want to gravitate towards AWS. If you're open source, you may want to gravitate towards Google Cloud. If you're a .NET developer, then Microsoft Azure makes a lot of sense. And get really good at understanding the products and services that are available for just that one provider. Each there's lots of providers out there, and you could spend a lot of time getting to know at a very high level what all the providers offer. But what will make you valuable is having a deep understanding of what one provider does, and then focusing in on a specific area within that. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is look at how you are building your tools and your solutions today, and how can you re-architect those solutions so they are very modular. So the example I always use here is Lego bricks, and Lego bricks are fantastic. They have a connector on the top and a receiver on the bottom where you can connect two or more Lego bricks together, and it is phenomenal what you can build with Lego bricks, from building a house to a ship to, I saw they just came out with Lego art. Um, what the bottom line is, though, is that you have these small modular components that are very specific on what they do. And instead of creating a big mammoth solution, just create one solution that's made up of many, many pieces that can be interchanged with each other. And this is why you're seeing the cloud providers accelerating their services, because they're just reusing infrastructure and foundational elements that they've already built. So that's the second, is making a modular approach. So, but in many ways, the third is the most important. It's changing your mindset. And the mindset is that I had this conversation with my father a couple of years ago. He said to me, he said, I don't understand the career you've chosen, Matthew, because I went to school, I went to college, and by the time I was 26, he went to postgrad school. He knew all that he needed to know for his career. And he actually worked in the auto industry. And he goes, the next 25, 30 years, I didn't have to re-educate myself. And whereas if you choose the career of going down cloud and DevOps, one of the most important elements of that is constant and continuous education. So for me, I look at what my father did, and it worked out great for him. But I relish the challenge of constantly educating myself and knowing that the information I have now will be replaced very easily 5 years from now with an automated system. And so I have to constantly re-educate and re-increase the value I bring. And so that's the third area, is that constant re-education. So pick a cloud provider, choose to create modular solutions, and then constantly re-educate yourself.
Excellent. So that reiterates what you said here, is that looking at particular skills.
Mm-hmm.
And can you comment on that third one?
Um, so the third one here, and this actually, I'm having a conversation right now with one of my clients, which is, how do you bring DevOps to quote unquote legacy tools? So believe it or not, many companies still have mainframe solutions that power huge parts of their business. I'm not a mainframe developer, never have been, but I understand the value that they bring to companies. At the same time, a lot of companies have invested heavily in commercial off-the-shelf software, what's often known as COTS, and they may have solutions that were virtualized in a VM environment. Very often I get told, well, I can't bring DevOps mindset to that. I cannot bring agile delivery to these environments. And I would argue every single day that, irrelevant of what the technology is, it's still software. Whether it is a mainframe solution, whether it is a COTS solution, whether it's something that you're building net new. So what you want to be looking for is the companies that are making available the opportunity that DevOps has, and AI ops as well, to unlock and bring the value that DevOps brings, not just for new solutions, but also for those legacy and off-the-shelf solutions as well.
It's an interesting area in another particular respect, because one of the first things that people complained about when lockdown happened here in California and a number of other US states was that they couldn't get through to file unemployment claims.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons for that is that state governments who ran these systems were using legacy systems that sometimes dated back to the 70s or the 1960s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And were not able to be scaled up to handle the load, or not able to adapt to changes in
Mm-hmm.
rules. So um, there's a lot of interest around the idea of looking at these legacy systems in government and in business, and finding ways to modernize them without breaking the bank, so to speak. So this is going
Yep.
to be a great area in future. So let's go on. And when we look at the way people work together and how we organize our teams and
Hmm.
manage our collective work, how how will we deal with the challenges that come up that are presented by this new environment? Like you said, we're not going into an office where we're all able to cluster into one meeting room. So we have to have different ways of staying in touch and managing our work and the work of others.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, and this actually impacts DevOps teams because for the last 5 or 6 years we've been encouraging DevOps teams to co-locate with each other. Particularly if you're doing power programming where you have two programmers sitting next to each other, you want those two people physically in the same room. I think to a large extent, we as humans, we like to be around each other, particularly when we're working on shared projects. We want to be together. However, as we move into the business as usual, or the new normal, I think things will change, and I think we have to get really comfortable with the concept of we don't have to physically be in the same room. We can virtually be in the same room. Again, we talked about the benefits earlier on about working from home. That's really nice. I really like it. I have super fast internet, faster than I do in the office. But one of the things that it does break down, and I think that this will be one of the changes that we'll start seeing, is as offices shrink in size and become more used to using that hoteling concept where you don't have a dedicated desk, you just go into an office and there's a number of desks and you just put your computer down wherever you feel like it. I think what we'll start seeing is that companies still do need to have people come and interact with each other, but it'll become more of an event activity that we do rather than day-to-day business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that. Um, it's interesting to see that in the virtual environment where there's weekly check-ins for teams, there's monthly
Yeah.
check-ins for entire organizations. Um, but again, as you say, uh, the notion of convening people face to face physically in one space, I think you're right. I think it's going to become an exceptional event rather than a daily habit.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So go ahead and run us through some of these points.
So some of the challenges I think that uh, that you'll see is I think that there's going to be short-term and long-term challenges. I think the short-term ones many of us are experiencing right now. There's the social challenges, political challenges, fiscal challenges for many people. The unemployment level in the United States right now is the highest it's been since the Great Depression. And those are short-term challenges that impact us, whether we're doing DevOps work or whatever work we're doing. But I see them as being short-term, so the next 6 to 12 months. I think there are then longer term challenges that we can be proactive on, and that's really helping our organizations become prepared for uncertainty. So if we go into, like for instance, when I'm building a solution, one of the things that we build into every solution is security. It's a foundation. We just assume every solution now is going to be insecure. And I think what we have to do is the same thing, but as from a human point of view of how we work with each other. Let's just make the assumption that we don't know whether or not we're going to be working in the office moving forward. So as companies reopen, there may be times when the companies close again. And you just mentioned this in California. Everybody just opened and now you've closed again. I think we'll see the same thing happen to other areas of the country in the United States. And there's talk of potentially a second wave. There's so much uncertainty. So instead of being anxious about that uncertainty, let's build that into our plan. And then when you do that, then that allows you to start positioning yourself for future and profitable growth. Instead of hoping things just go away, plan for things to be different, and then you can work around those restrictions that have been provided to you. And again, that will help mitigate long-term problems. And really, it kind of then starts driving towards the two foundations of becoming then a more agile operation and building stability and scalability into your solutions. And that's fundamentally the goal of the DevOps team, is to be able to have a much more stable environment that can scale. And we just take that and we bring that as a really kind of a divining rod to how we deliver these technologies into our organizations.
So let's move on. Are there specialized skills that people need to learn or should be looking at that will help them become, their organizations become more resilient in the face of future disruptions wherever they may come?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really those specialized skills really come down to uh, a couple of key areas. One is how do we digitize the human interaction that we have today? And what's interesting is we've been talking about this for 20 plus years now of digitizing the human interaction. Um, and it's never really worked because we didn't have something that forced us to adapt to that new model. And also the technologies 20 years ago were clunky compared to today. So people are much more receptive to that digitized experience. And then the second is to really start adapting what you can do with artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence itself is just a huge field of different things you can use. But that's definitely another area that I would be looking at, is leveraging the value that AI and ML and related technologies can bring to the way you engage with your customers.
Let's go on. So, as you pointed out, AI,
Yep.
AI,
So
and
so
AI ops as well.
Yeah, so if we look at the three key areas, is it's run the business, grow the business, and then rapid iteration. And run the business is your using AI to manage your network operations, and then scaling with cloud. Grow the business is DevOps, whether you call it DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE. These are all terms that are really essentially interchangeable with each other, but it's all about rapidly growing your business, and then remaining agile. And the value with agile is, if you look at traditional software delivery, and many companies still do traditional software delivery, you're looking at 6, 12, 18-month delivery cycles. In some places, they'll go 3 to 5 years. And what COVID-19 has shown is that delivery cycles can change dramatically. Now, um, the changes that you typically see aren't as quite as dramatic as we've seen this year, but they tend to be more subtle. So with Agile, instead of just taking this one linear direction, you can zig and zag to meet the customer needs. And my final statement there is, get a good understanding of whether you're working with Microsoft Azure, whether you're working with AWS or Google Cloud, and really get good at specializing in one of those cloud providers.
Right. So key takeaways. What have we learned today?
So I think a few key takeaways is that There are skills that have never been in more demand because of the digitization renaissance we're now going through because of COVID-19. Um, Always keep an eye on the future as DevOps matures because it matures quickly. Keep your skills and updated and bring that mindset for DevOps into your organization. I strongly encourage build to the cloud. Just will give you flexibility that building local on-premise solutions simply can't provide. And then take that model and build that in as a strategy that opens up value within your organization. And then finally, become comfortable working with uncertainty. The last 6 months have been certainly very uncertain. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So get comfortable working with that uncertainty and embrace it, because that will help you refocus how you present your arguments to your company for how to implement different types of technologies and solutions. I apologize. I realize I've kind of been overrunning here on the talking. Stuart, are you there? Stuart, I can't hear you. Are you there, Stuart?
I realized I had muted myself. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
Very foolish. But yeah, please tell us, you members of the audience, what skills are you looking to acquire in cloud and in DevOps?
And maybe whilst people are doing that, we can start doing the questions and answers.
Yeah, we can actually do that. And what I'd like to start with is um, basic question. A front-end developer asks, what's the most cutting-edge skill they can look to prepare themselves for cloud and DevOps?
So I think so this was from a front end developer.
Yeah.
So I think I get really good at cloud, and cloud environment changes on a day-to-day basis. I mean, just there are so many services, it's really hard to keep up. Um, I would, from a front end developer, I would pick a technology and get really, really good at it. Sorry, a framework. And the two frameworks that I would get really good at are either going to be React or Angular. React, I would argue, is probably more popular now than Angular was, but both are used extensively by many companies and maturing rapidly. What I like with both of them is that they're not limited to just web applications. You can actually build mobile applications with them as well. So definitely from a front end development, React. From a back end, really get good at Node. Node.js is amazing what you can do with it, and get really, really good at using that.
Okay. Here's a question from Nevin who asks, isn't the DevOps more like a methodology to execute projects using tools from a wide-ranging toolkit?
Yes. So yes, it is a methodology. It's also a mindset, and that's really kind of what I bring in when I'm talking with leaders. Is that in many instances, some of the tools you may have been using for quite some time. A lot of companies have implemented agile and Kanban boards for almost 10 years in some instances. But when you say DevOps, you're actually implying a evolution of how you actually do that delivery, and that delivery gets done by having people thinking differently, implementing different processes, and then yes, having tools. Good question.
Navneet asks about switching. I mean, you're going from an existing legacy environment into cloud enabled and DevOps enabled environments. Can you comment on the differences in doing this and the ease of doing this in service industries versus product industries?
So that's a very good question. And personally, I've gone through that transition. And so I really liked having a data center. I could go in, I could control the environment, and we'd stand up solutions. And what I took was, instead of rewiring my brain overnight, what I took when I moved from more traditional legacy solutions to cloud, quote unquote, modern solution delivering, was, what can I take that I'm already using that applies to this new environment? So, you can just transition some of your skill set, because they will transition very nicely. And then when you look at that gap between what can work and what the full skill set you need to have, start just tackling that gap in small chunks. So you're not having to, consume a completely different paradigm in one direction, because at the end of the day, it's still software, and we've been doing software delivery for decades now. And so it's take what you know, apply it, and then adapt it over time.
We have a question about DevOps for managed services.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on where Abhishek asked the question? You'd like to know where he can learn about DevOps for managed services.
So this is actually very interesting, and I'm actually working with a client right now where almost that same question came up. And when you think of managed services really falls into that realm of commercial off-the-shelf solutions, so COTS solutions. And to me, that there are three layers of when it comes to COTS. There's open COTS, which really feel like a DevOps-like environment. There's closed COTS, where you can connect to the system, the commercial software. Maybe you can connect through connectors or APIs. And then you have managed systems. And a managed system is an environment that's very much locked down. What I would encourage you to do is really, with those managed systems, is you want to work with the provider, and the first question you want to ask them is, what is your roadmap? What is your roadmap to unlocking these systems so that we can extend the value that we've invested into this system? The second is maintaining that system. Is, how can I use a DevOps mindset for how I do releases? Can I apply that to the managed system? And I may not be able to do it for the whole system, but can I do it to sections of the system? And then the third really comes into, with some systems, is, have we reached the end of the life of this system? And for instance, I'm constantly talking to companies about application rationalization. When we stand up a tool within our company, even if only one person is using that tool, we tend to be very hesitant to remove that tool. I think we need to be much more bold and brave about eliminating legacy solutions and the technical debt that gets surrounded by that. So really good question there.
We have a few quick technology questions. How important is it for DevOps, a person planning to go into DevOps, to learn Linux?
Oh, I don't think that's important. I mean, yes, there's a benefit to it, but I'm not a Linux expert. I work on Mac and Windows. I prefer Mac. So you don't have to be a Linux expert. What you'll find, and this is one of the benefits of most of the DevOps tools that I use, is that they'll work across all the platforms. And so because you're working in terminal window, or command line to do your instructions, they'll work the same across all platforms, generally speaking.
And someone would ask you to address web stack.
So, whenever you're looking at any kind of stack, you want to be understanding, how does that stack apply? And so, for instance, a typical web stack would be there's one where you would we actually just working on a video that this week for Simplilearn on the I believe it's the Mern stack, where it's MongoDB with Express. I can't remember what the R is for, and then Node.js. And so web stacks are good. I wouldn't get too hung up on them. I mean, a lot of times when you're interviewing for jobs, they'll say, "Do you know XYZ stack?" And that's okay. But the connectors and the other tools that come around those stacks tend to mature and change quickly. And so don't get too hung up on the stack. Look at what is the value of the individual tools that I'm working with. So, for instance, when you're working with Node.js, knowing Express, which is a HTTP, React. I know. Yeah. So with Node.js, three tools that work really well to each other, that complement each other, is the Mern stack. So it's MongoDB, which is a NoSQL environment, different to relational database, but very popular. There's Express, which is a HTTP server, similar to Apache, a little bit more powerful. React.js, and then Node.js. And those are four really good tools in a web stack that anybody should get to learn. Are they the right tools for the job? That they may change, but they're four really good tools that show that you have a full end-to-end understanding of the technology.
And the last question I'm going to take is, could it seems like a simple question, but I want to make sure we cover it. Could you explain the exact difference between DevOps and cloud?
So there isn't. This goes back to the other question, which is DevOps is a mindset. Cloud is a set of tools. So you have tools that are in the cloud. We used to have them in our data center on our desktop computers. We've just now moved them into a virtualized environment that we call the cloud. DevOps is the mindset. It's the people skills. It's the communication skills. It's the processes as well as the tools. And the tools you'll find are local tools. For instance, installing, you'd run Node.js in your cloud environment with Express, but then you may have React that you're working with locally. So it becomes, cloud is where the tools are, and DevOps is the mindset you bring to it.
Very good. So before we finish the webinar, I just want to share the poll result from the last poll for a moment. And people have a broad range of skills that they like to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us today and sharing with us your expertise.
Not a problem.
Can you tell people how to get in touch with you?
Best way to get hold of me is on LinkedIn. I have my LinkedIn link there, but you can actually go onto LinkedIn. There aren't too many Matthew Davids out there. You can do a search for me and suddenly reach out. And also, I do a lot of videos and articles for Simplilearn, so you can find me there as well.
Wonderful. And I hope people will connect with you. I hope also that people will connect with Simplilearn.
Yes.
Go on to the next slide, please. Matthew, there you go. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and you can connect with us on any of those platforms. You can contact us. You can see what we do at our main website. And we want to thank you for being here at this last episode of the Step into the Sunlight series. We hope that these webinars have helped focus you on the future and what life will be like as we progress through this COVID-19 pandemic environment, and hopefully as we said, step into the sunlight after this darkness. So thank you again for being here. We will be having future webinars. Please keep an eye out for emails from us announcing those. We have a expert webinar coming up next week with the chief data scientist of Airtel Corporation, and probably love to listen to that. So again, watch out for an email for us or take a look at our website. That's the end of the webinar. Please log off of WebEx. When you do, you will see a pop-up window with a survey. And if you would be so kind to answer those survey questions, and at the end of process, we'll get back in touch with you if you like. So thanks again, and again, log off at this time.
Thank you, Stuart. It was great talking.
Thanks, Matthew.